those of you who don't know, the CIPD is a membership body of more than 135,000 HR professionals from the UK, but we are increasingly becoming a global organisation as, like many commercial bodies, we are looking to beyond Europe to help with the growth, given the very tight pressures that we're facing at the moment in the UK. I think it's a very timely conference, given that it comes during a week when we saw economic growth figures published yesterday, which were worse than many of us had expected. And as we all know, the economic growth figures have a clear relationship with jobs growth. The fact that it's decreased by 0.2% sits uncomfortably with the 2.5% annual growth that the CIPD contends you need to stimulate jobs in the economy. So that's the backdrop and the huge challenge we're facing. And I know that Kirsty will be speaking from representing the welfare to work providers after me, but you probably also saw the National Audit Office express some concerns about the ability of providers to meet what they described as overly ambitious targets, which they might not meet. So we have these two overriding pressures bearing down on us. But while much will depend on economic growth, government policy, and indeed the effectiveness of welfare to work providers, the success of the scheme will ultimately depend on employer involvement and participation in the scheme. And it's HR professionals who are, after all, the recruiters, the trainers, the guys who are responsible for retaining staff that are critical to opening access to the young unemployed. And as we shall see later on, this is no easy task. In 2005, we published some research which showed a high degree of discrimination against the long-term unemployed, even during buoyant years. So the first challenge then, of course, is to persuade employers of the business case for employing the long-term unemployed. We at the CIPD have long recognised our social responsibility, and I think I was chatting to Kirsty just the other day, and she recalls our campaign on the long-term unemployed and ex-offenders 5 years ago, and what we called the collective core jobless, those who are furthest from the market, labour market. And the campaign was underpinned by research that we published of more than 1,000 employers, which looked at this issue of discrimination. It showed that of more than 1,000 employers, 2/3 rated their experience of hiring IB claimants as either neutral or positive, and less than a fifth actually said they were negative. So we really did press that case for long-term unemployed. And what was particularly interesting was that some of the figures for the other core jobless groups, such as ex-offenders, actually rated even higher across all the measures that were gauged, that included productivity, reliability, and attendance. And this was admittedly during a buoyant year, which was 2005. However, the same research also showed some discrimination. Almost 1 in 5 employers said that they excluded IB claimants for reasons of mental health, and almost 1 in 10 said that they excluded people on IB for reasons of physical health. And I should add that we're, with the advent of the work programme, about to update that research in the next month or so with a similar survey of 1,000 employers, with a similar aim to get more of our members involved in the work programme to make it the success that it so richly deserves. On a more practical level, we're engaging with the agenda in line with government policies across all parties. Many of our efforts have been closely targeted at young people, which is the age cohort, as we all know, that's been most affected by the recession. Firstly, we've just started a youth mentoring scheme with Job Centre Plus. The idea is that we match our members with young people who've been at the jobs market for some time, and we help them with stuff like CV writing and interview skills. The skills that our members tell us that young people are actually lacking, so we recognise our role in trying to bridge that gap. It's not just about skills in the workplace, it's actually about presentation, among other things. And the scheme is going extremely well. We are putting the majority of participants either in employment or at least switching an attitude from one that's been quite downbeat about their overall prospects to being very positive about the idea of going to work. However, it's not been without its challenges. We are seeing a sizable minority referred back to Job Centre Plus simply because they're not filling in further forms or they're not turning out. And I think going back to the welfare work programme rather, the universal credit I think will be a really useful lever to try and incentivise young people back into it with this message that work will pay for every hour that you work, because perhaps that incentive has been lacking in the past. We've also published various guides. I won't bore you with all of them, but of very topical relevance. In fact, it's been published this week, is our apprenticeships guide. Because this follows, again, research that we've done at the CIPD, which says that majority actually feel as if it's not appropriate for their organisation. We've seen huge progress in this area. We're now seeing sort of roughly around a quarter of employers offer apprenticeships, which is almost double what they were 2 years ago. But actually many don't see it as their role, and it's actually appropriate for all organisations. Many are fearful about not having an overall framework, many are fearful about the legal steps that you need to follow, and all of this is included in our guide. So I really would urge you to go to our website, cipd.co.uk, to look at that. And of course this is very relevant to the work programme, because one of the objectives of the work programme is to create not just employment but sustainable employment. It's our hope that many of the participants not just get put on the programme but actually take part in formal training schemes such as apprenticeships, given that it's high quality and a greater likelihood that it will lead to sustainable employment. But of course that has to come with reassurances from the participants, not only in terms of the formal training schemes but the informal things like ensuring that they know that they've got somebody to turn to, that they've got a mentor, whether it's just an ongoing support from their line manager. Of course, the other dimension in this is government policy, and in particular economic policy. I think across the piece, the picture is fairly mixed, I would say. Firstly, we did applaud the government when they first announced the work programme. We said it was the best programme in a generation. We stand by that view because of the premise of it, because of the detailed measures such as the universal credit that's contained within it, and the involvement of the welfare to work providers that offers that tailored support to participants who need the greatest help and creating sustainable employment. Equally, we've heard the youth contract announced recently, which again will target young people. However, we do have some concerns about levels of take-up. One of the elements of it is a subsidy to get people in employment. There is a question mark over dead weight, but also that's not actually linked to sustainable employment and the skills agenda in particular. And I think we would have liked to have seen much more support for apprenticeships, which was a much smaller part of the package than the employer incentive to hire young people. On employment policy, there's some positives. We're really pleased that the government seems to be planning ahead with a policy to introduce flexible working for everybody, and not just carers and parents. And I think the group that we're talking about today will benefit perhaps most of all, as we, there's some delicate balances around working hours and progression and regression in some cases as we manage medical conditions that some people on the various schemes have. And lastly, employee engagement is something that the government have picked up. We've got an employee engagement task force whose role it is to spread good practice, and that's something that we've been campaigning for, because, as we all know, the UK suffers a people management skills deficit in the UK, which has led to poor outcomes for those in employment, as well as sort of lower productivity. However, in contradiction to this, despite David Cameron's stated support for this, I think it would be fair to say that the greater ease with which employers are now set to dismiss workers actually contradicts this. It's doing this to try and stimulate jobs growth, which is what ultimately this programme depends upon. But as we've seen from various evidence, even the government's own research, it's actually not regulation that's holding employers back from hiring. Demand is clearly the big driver. The other two are access to finance and the skills issue, and I think the government would be better addressing these two key priorities that our members overwhelmingly tell us are the key drivers to stimulating jobs growth, not regulation. And I'll come back to the regulation point now. The vast weight of available evidence tells us that the UK has a functioning well labour market that's flexible, very flexible by international comparisons, certainly with the rest of Europe. And as we've seen, our problems stem not from regulation, but actually from education and skills. So to make it easier to dismiss workers without good cause is highly questionable. None of these things will make any meaningful difference to employment in a demand-starved economy and could harm the long-term prospects of UK PLC by fostering precisely the kind of harsh workplace conditions that deter staff from going the extra mile for their employers. And it's, again, the cohort that we're talking about that could really be affected by this. If employee relations, job insecurity, anxiety is increased because of seemingly less job security, then many of our more vulnerable employees might suffer as a result, and in turn have a negative impact on productivity and the idea of the happiness society that David Cameron is keen to champion. And lastly, since demand is the key driver for jobs growth for our members, it would be remiss not to reflect on the government's Plan A, especially given that the jobs total lags the economic growth figures that we've seen. It's our contention that we could do a lot more, but if I had David Cameron in a room now, what I would probably say is to reverse the VAT hike from last year. That's clearly had an impact on everybody. We've seen how it's affected the retail sector in particular. Clearly there are reasons why that sector has been affected, but it has been hammered by that VAT hike at a time when consumers are really feeling the squeeze. So I think that while on paper the government's welfare reform programme is the best in a generation, it would be frustrating if all the levers, including those in economic policy, were not pulling in the right direction to make more of our members contribute to the success that it deserves.